If you're a fan of military parades, Beijing today was your heaven. Thousands of soldiers goose-stepping as one, all to celebrate a remarkable anniversary. 70 years of the founding of the People's Republic. A parade months in the making, high on symbolism and clear in purpose, to signal that China is on the rise and is here to stay. President Xi Jinping minced no words in his short speech.
Today, a socialist China stands proudly in the East. There is no power that can shake the position of our great motherland. There is no power that can stop the Chinese people and the Chinese nation from moving forward.
President Xi there standing at the same spot where Mao Zedong stood back in 1949 and declared the founding of the People's Republic. That historic announcement was just the start of one of the most important chapters of world history, the rise of China.
October the 1st, 1949, Mao Zedong proclaims the founding of the People's Republic of China on Tiananmen Square. That ended decades of civil war, pitting Chairman Mao's communists against nationalists. Mao transformed the feudal society. His great leap forward collectivized industry and agriculture and set unreachable targets. The result, catastrophic famine and the deaths of tens of millions. Facing criticism, Mao launched his Cultural Revolution in 1966. Thousands of opponents were sent to camps or executed. After decades of isolation, China took steps to open up to the world, welcoming US President Richard Nixon in 1972. Chairman Mao's death in 1976, the nation's founder becomes its eternal icon. What followed was rapid economic growth as President Deng Xiaoping relaxed the state's grip on the market. But the boom was tarnished by a bloody crackdown on the 1989 pro-democracy movement, symbolized by the standoff on Tiananmen Square. The new millennium saw China retake control of Hong Kong from the British, join the World Trade Organization and host the hugely successful Beijing Olympic Games, putting itself on the podium of world-leading nations. But rapid economic growth has come at a cost. Cities are choked by pollution, access to information restricted, social cohesion rigidly enforced, minorities repressed. Though its economy is starting to flag, at the age of 70, the People's Republic of China is showing no signs of retirement.
It's been a story of massive changes over the years, and one man who's had a front row seat to many of them has been Victor Gao. Now, he was the former English interpreter to Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping, who began the process of China's opening up and reform in the late 70s. Mr. Gao is currently Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization, and he joins me now from Beijing. Victor Gao, great to have you on the program. How would you describe where China finds itself today?
I think celebrations will happen everywhere in China. And I think when we celebrate the 70th year anniversary, we need to look back upon what China has achieved over the past 70 years, and in particular, over the past 41 years. And I would say anyone with any decency of the mind would agree that there has been tremendous amount of transformation and changes for the better in China. China now is already the second largest economy in the world, the largest trading nation in the world, the largest manufacturing nation in the world, and I think the future still bodes very well. So I think it's a time of celebration, it's a time of reflection, but also it's a time for looking forward into the future, for what the future will hold for China, for the Chinese nation, and also for world peace.
When one looks at the past 70 years, Mr. Gao, of course, it's a story of superlatives, and transformation would be one way of describing it. But what has been the cost of this transformation? I mean, if you look at China today, we're looking at increased government control over the internet, virtually no political opposition, greater surveillance of the population. Would you say that that cost is worth this transformation?
Well, I would say, philosophically, everything you do or do not do will have an opportunity cost. And in China, while we celebrate today, there is no complacency. The Chinese record is not a 100% satisfactory record. We, of course, have all kinds of problems and challenges. However, I would say in total, when you look at the situation in objectivity and in its totality, I think all of us will need to agree that the Chinese changes are for the better. There are tremendous amount of headaches. There are tremendous amount of challenges. I would say in Beijing, lots of people are not happy today because of the traffic interruption. But overall, we are very happy about the celebrations. It is the same case for China as a whole. We need to overcome all these challenges while we continue to move forward to strive for greater achievements.
But Mr. Gao, it's a little bit more than just traffic headaches that we are referring to in terms of the challenges. We're talking about the detention of up to 1 million, in fact, more than 1 million ethnic Muslims in Xinjiang, ongoing political protests, demands for reform in Hong Kong. What does that say about the state of China right now? And does the government in Beijing need to take a second look at all of these different issues?
Let me deal very briefly on the 3 points you mentioned, cybersecurity, situation in Xinjiang, and situation in Hong Kong. Now, for cybersecurity, China is now the leading country in the world as far as cyber usage is concerned. There are more internet users in China today than any other country in the world. And China is leading the way for the 5G Internet of the Things. Now, indeed, internet control in China is very tight and lots of people may not be very happy about it. But I would say overall, the tight control of internet is meant for maintaining stability rather than, for example, falling into the trap of color revolution or one regime change after another, as we have seen repeatedly in many other parts of the world. Situation in Xinjiang is very complicated, but overall, I think there is very grave concern about terrorism, extremism, and separatism. Don't forget, Xinjiang borders with Afghanistan, and 18 years into the war in Afghanistan, the war is still going on. And the spillover of terrorism from Afghanistan into Xinjiang is a real one, and terrorism is a real menace. For Hong Kong, I think China will strictly abide by the one country, two system, and eventually let's hope that rule of law and law and order will prevail in Hong Kong.
Right. I need to come back to a word that you mentioned a short while back, stability. I mean, this is a word that was also used by the man that you worked for, Deng Xiaoping. And Deng Xiaoping, of course, the great leader, credited with opening up China to the outside world. How do you think Deng Xiaoping would view the current political climate in China? Would he say that this needs to be further reformed or that it is okay where it is?
Thank you very much for mentioning Deng Xiaoping and my experience as his English interpreter. Indeed, while Deng Xiaoping was the paramount leader of China, he emphasized constantly that keeping stability at home and keeping peace abroad would be two pillars upon which China needs to develop itself. Now, I think keeping stability is as important today as it was in the 1980s. For Deng Xiaoping, I would be sure that he will be happy about the transformation in China for all the better, all under his opening the door and under his great leadership, for example. He would also urge that China move forward more cautiously, for example, and deal with the China-US relations more smartly and with greater wisdom, rather than being dragged into a trade war or a tariff war. And I would say Deng Xiaoping would continue to emphasize that the reform, both political as well as economic reform, are the only way out for China. While we come across all kinds of problems and challenges, we firmly believe by continuing reform, we will be in a better position to overcome all these problems and challenges going forward.
It'll be interesting to see what shape that reform takes. Victor Gao, Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization. Pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
After Mao's death in 1976, China's next leader, Deng Xiaoping, introduced some reforms that opened the economy. His policies brought China into the global market and resulted in the current form of the country's communist-backed capitalism. Chinese GDP rose from 150,000 billion in 1978 to more than $14 trillion in 2010. Today, it's the world's second biggest economic power after the United States. Let's talk a bit more about this with my colleague Clifford Coonan, who is our resident China expert. Clifford, the per capita GDP in 1949 was just roughly $50. Today it's 10,000. That's quite impressive. How did that happen?
It is certainly impressive. I mean, it's the biggest story of social transformation the world has ever seen. We've seen the emergence of this, what is now a middle class, where there was no middle class before, or very, very small. What has happened has been a process of reform, combined, though, with some backward steps. As you pointed out in your introduction, we had the Great Leap Forward, which saw millions die of famine. But at the same time, it has been a gradual process of reform, which created the conditions. In some ways, it's been almost over the past few years with the Communist Party not getting involved in things. And by allowing what seems to be this Chinese energy for production and entrepreneurship to flourish. And I think that's one of the big contributions.
Talking about this entrepreneurship, I mean, can you still call this communism, what the Chinese are doing? Isn't this more sort of a capitalist dictatorship in a way?
Well, I think it's definitely communist, and if you read the documents handed out at the National People's Congress in March, it's always talking about Marxist-Leninism. It's very much in that language. In operational terms, though, what you do see is a very, very pure form of capitalism at work. But it's a question of when the controls are imposed, and that's when you really see the communist angle come in, because at the moment under Xi Jinping, for example, we're seeing things that are coming more and more focused on him and more focused on the party state.
It's very much about Xi, isn't it? How important is he as a person? Is he making his role bigger than it was before?
He is. I mean, he's abolished term limits. One thing is we always discuss him as President Xi Jinping, but actually in Chinese his title is General Secretary. It's the party title, and that's the key position in China. It's the party, is the political power is the main focus. So yes, it's very much Xi focused right now.
Thank you very much, Clifford Coonan. Now, while China is no longer posting double-digit growth, the country has an ambitious investment plan for the future at the core of its so-called New Silk Road. It's an infrastructure and development project spanning more than 60 countries. It will see Beijing building ports, rail networks, power plants and roads across the world, enabling the country to tap into export markets and gain access to important raw materials. But is that all? Or is there more behind China's plan concerning the Belt and Road Initiative? Our financial correspondent in New York, Jens Korte, spoke to Sawa Kashmiri, Professor of Political Sciences at the Peace and War Center in Norwich University.
So with the Belt and Road Initiative, will that lead China to become the superpower in the world?
Well, that's a really interesting question, right? And in my book that was just released, I point out that the Belt and Road is really a part of China's three-step strategy to become a superpower. So the first step was to get rich, right, which they did. The second step was to make their coastline unapproachable. So today, it's very risky for American aircraft carriers in conflict to get within 1,000 kilometers of China. And so this is the third step, to become the most influential country in the world over the next 2 decades and to connect itself to all these other countries. And I might add that the strategy that China is following is not the one that America followed after the Second World War, which is to set up bases, right, to extend its influence. China is much more of a business-oriented country, so it's win-win. It comes to countries and says, you'll get rich, we'll get rich. And it just is a very exciting and new idea.
I'm now joined by Professor Steve Tsang. He is the director of the China Institute at the SOAS University in London and joins us now from there. Professor Tsang, is it really a win-win situation there that China is promising?
Well, that will depend on how you define win-win. Sometimes people jokingly say that when the Chinese talk about win-win, it means they win it first and then they win it again. Now, when you're talking about Belt and Road Initiative, then you really are looking at different time frame. In the short term, before the loans that the Chinese government give out to recipient countries to finance those projects are due, then it is clearly win-win. The Chinese get the contracts, they employ workers, generate income, send them back to China. The recipient countries get infrastructures being built. But when those loans are due, then there is a question of those countries not being able to pay the debt and have to deal with the issue. Either the Chinese government have to write off some of the debt or the Chinese government will take over some of those projects. Then I don't think it looks so much like win-win.
With this Belt and Road Initiative, China clearly has a long-term plan on how to succeed economically. It remains to be seen if that works, but at least it is a plan. Do you see any other large economy with a similar plan?
No, I don't see other countries doing the same kind of Belt and Road mega projects that the Chinese Communist Party likes to do. I mean, you will have, for example, countries like Japan, which is also doing massive development aid projects, but they are very, very different. They're much more well-based in terms of the viability and sustainability of the projects. There is the scale and the ambition of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative that is breathtaking.
Professor Steve Tsang from the SOAS University London, thank you very much.